I'm Mark, and this story isn't some kind of twisted drama. It's my life, every bit as raw and screwed up as it gets. Until not too long ago, I thought I had it all figured out. A perfect marriage, a wife who seemed to be my soulmate, and a best friend I'd known for what felt like forever. Sophie, my wife of 8 years, was everything to me. We did everything together. Hiking on weekends, trying out new recipes on lazy Sundays, even taking those impromptu road trips that ended at some random beach, laughing like kids. And Tom? He was like a brother. Hell, we were practically inseparable since grade school. I worked crazy hours at my job. I mean, top-level corporate stuff, endless meetings and phone calls at all hours, but I always thought it was worth it. We were building a life together, planning vacations, saving for a home. Everything I did, every extra shift I pulled was for us. Or at least, that's what I thought back then. Tom was around all the time, and it never bothered me. If anything, I loved that the two of them got along. Tom would come over to our place, chill out with us, have dinner, and they'd laugh about the dumb stuff we all did as kids. To me, it seemed like the three of us were just one big happy family. And maybe that was the problem. I was too trusting. Or maybe I just didn't want to see the truth. Then, my dad, Robert, came to stay with us for a bit. He was recovering from knee surgery and needed help getting around, so we set up the guest room for him. Having him, there was a blast from the past, his loud laughs, his grilling, his constant teasing about when we'd finally give him grandkids. It was nice. It felt like family. But it also became the turning point, the moment when everything started to crack. Robert's the type of guy who notices everything, and I mean everything. He's old school, has this sixth sense about people. I'd always dismissed it as him being overprotective, but when it came to Sophie and Tom, he saw right through them. At first, it was just little things. He'd mention that Sophie and Tom seemed awfully close, or make jokes about how they seemed to share a lot of inside jokes. I brushed him off, telling him that Sophie and Tom were just good friends. And besides, Sophie was the kind of person who hugged everyone. She was warm, social. That's what I loved about her. But that nagging look on his face wouldn't go away. One day, I came home early from work, feeling like I needed a break. The office politics, the grind, it was all getting to me, so I decided to take a half day. I walked in, expecting to find Sophie reading or maybe doing some yoga, but she and Tom were sitting way too close on the couch. It was the way they quickly pulled apart when they saw me, the sort of jolt you get when you're caught doing something you shouldn't be doing. They both laughed it off, saying they were watching some comedy special, but I could tell something was off. I didn't confront them right then and there. I just couldn't wrap my head around what I was feeling. That's when Dad started going on about the looks. He'd catch Sophie staring at Tom when she thought nobody was looking, these long, lingering glances that were more than just friendly. And Tom? He'd have this smirk whenever Sophie was around, like they shared some kind of secret. It was eating away at me, but I kept telling myself I was imagining things. Paranoia? Maybe? Or maybe it was just stress from work. But then one night, after dinner, Dad and I were having a beer in the backyard, just talking about life, the future, the usual. And out of nowhere, he says, "Son, I'm going to say something you might not like, but you need to hear it." I laughed it off, saying, "What's new? You always have an opinion." But his face was dead serious. "I think something's going on between Sophie and Tom," he said. My gut twisted like I'd been punched. I told him he was crazy, that he was reading too much into things. But deep down, that seed of doubt was already planted. The thing is, my dad's always been a no BS guy. If he felt something was wrong, he'd say it, but he never lied or exaggerated just for the hell of it. He let it go that night, but I could tell he wasn't convinced, and neither was I. I started to pay more attention, trying to act normal, trying to be the Mark who trusted his wife and best friend completely. But I'd catch these little things. Sophie pulling her hand away too quickly when I walked into a room, Tom giving me this uneasy smile that never quite reached his eyes. Still, I try to tell myself that I was crazy, that I was overreacting. That's the worst part about being cheated on. You start to gaslight yourself. You convince yourself that you're paranoid, that you're seeing things that aren't there, because facing the truth is way more painful than living in the lie. And then there was this one Saturday afternoon that finally flipped a switch in my dad's head. I was out running errands, and when I came back, I found my dad sitting on the front porch, looking like he'd seen a ghost. Sophie and Tom were inside, laughing loudly, too loudly, at some stupid joke, but the second they saw me walk up, the laughter stopped. It was like walking into a room and finding everyone staring at you, but no one saying a word. When I asked Dad what was up, he just shook his head and muttered, "We'll talk later." That night, when Sophie was in the shower, Dad came into my room and said, "We need to figure out what's really going on, Mark. I'm telling you, something's not right, and I'm going to prove it." And that's when it all started to fall apart. He wasn't wrong. Deep down, I knew it too. But nothing could have prepared me for what we were about to uncover. After that talk with my dad, something shifted. I tried to pretend that everything was fine, to act like the clueless husband who didn't suspect a thing, but the truth was, I was drowning in suspicion. And I wasn't the only one. My dad, Robert, became like a hawk in our home, always watching, always listening. It wasn't something he wanted to do, but he couldn't help it. There was this instinct he had, like a father's radar, that told him something was wrong. And honestly, I was grateful for it, even if I couldn't admit it out loud. So, while I was going to work every day, grinding through the hours and pretending everything was fine, Robert stayed home. Supposedly, it was to recover from his knee surgery, but we both knew the real reason. He had his eyes on Sophie. I didn't realize it back then, but he was becoming my silent guardian, trying to protect me from the truth, or at least prepare me for it. It all started to go downhill one afternoon. I had a big meeting at work, so there was no way I could come home early. That day, Dad noticed something weird. Sophie hadn't mentioned anything about plans, but just after lunch, she suddenly called Tom and invited him over. I still remember the way my dad recounted it to me later, how casual her voice was on the phone, like she didn't have a care in the world. And when Tom showed up, there was no hesitation, no awkwardness. He walked right in like he owned the place. Dad said he tried to play it cool, stayed in his room, and left the door cracked open so he could hear what was going on. They were laughing, just like they always did. But there was something different, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. When he finally peeked out, he saw them sitting on the couch, way too close for comfort. He said it was like they'd forgotten he was even there, like they were in their own little world. Now, I know my dad. He's not one to jump to conclusions or act without thinking. But that day, he told me he felt something break inside him, like some wall he'd been holding up for my sake had finally come crashing down. He couldn't let it go any longer. He needed proof, something concrete, something he could bring to me without any room for doubt. And that's when he came up with the idea of the camera. I remember how he looked when he told me later, this mix of shame and determination. "Mark," he said, "I didn't want to do it. God knows I didn't want to spy on my own daughter-in-law, but I had to be sure. For you." And so, while I was at work the next day, he set up a small hidden camera in the living room, tucked away so carefully that nobody would ever notice it. The plan was simple. Just see what happens when Sophie thought nobody was watching. The next few days went by like torture for both of us. I was busy with work, trying to act like everything was normal, but my mind was a mess. Every time I got home, I'd find Dad acting all jittery, like he wanted to tell me something, but couldn't find the words. And Sophie? She was just Sophie. Bright smile, warm laugh, everything you'd expect from the woman I loved. But once you've got doubt crawling under your skin, nothing feels the same. Every touch felt fake. Every word sounded rehearsed. And Tom? He kept showing up, more than before, almost like he knew the coast was clear whenever I was gone. After a few days of footage, Dad finally sat down to watch it. He told me that part was the hardest, sitting in his room, pressing play, and waiting for his worst fears to come true. The first few videos showed nothing, just Sophie lounging around, texting, scrolling through her phone. But then there it was. One afternoon, Sophie let Tom in, and it was like all bets were off. They didn't waste any time. As soon as the door closed, they were on each other, kissing, hands all over the place like two teenagers who couldn't wait to tear each other's clothes off. The footage showed them stumbling onto our couch, my couch, and the rest. Well, you can imagine. My dad didn't go into detail, thank God, but he didn't need to. The image of Sophie and Tom together in our home was enough. He said he had to stop watching, had to leave the room because the rage was boiling up so hot inside him, he couldn't see straight. I thought I was going to punch a hole through the damn wall, he confessed. He didn't know how to face me, didn't know what to say, or how to break the news. It was the kind of truth that you can't unsee, the kind that rips everything apart. That evening, when I got home, Dad was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his hands. Sophie was out with friends. At least, that's what she'd said. I remember walking in and seeing his face, pale as a ghost. "What's up, Dad?" I asked, trying to keep things light, but he couldn't even look me in the eye. "We need to talk, Mark," he said, voice barely a whisper. And that's when he told me. Every word hit like a bullet. The hidden camera, the footage, Tom coming over, everything. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. It was like the world was collapsing in on me, and I was buried under all of it. My heart was pounding. My ears were ringing, and all I could hear was the sound of my life shattering into a million pieces. But he wasn't done. "Mark, there's something you need to see for yourself," he said, pulling out his laptop. And there it was, just a couple of clicks, and suddenly I was staring at the screen, watching my wife and my best friend betray me in the most intimate, sickening way possible. I didn't know if I wanted to smash the laptop, cry, or just vomit. I didn't watch the whole thing. I couldn't. The moment they started, I slammed the laptop shut and threw it across the room. It crashed against the wall, pieces flying everywhere. I was shaking, my fists clenched so tight I thought my knuckles would break. My dad just stood there, hands out like he wanted to grab me, to hold me back, to stop me from doing something stupid. "Mark, calm down," he pleaded. "We'll figure this out. We'll do it the right way." But I wasn't hearing any of it. All I could think was that my whole life was a lie, that Sophie and Tom had made a complete fool out of me. And now I needed to figure out what the hell to do next. After that night, everything changed. You'd think that once you know the truth, things would start making sense, but it's the opposite. Everything becomes one big blur. Every touch, every smile, every word Sophie ever said to me. I started replaying them all in my head, trying to figure out how I missed it. It felt like I was living in someone else's skin, just pretending to be Mark, the happy husband, while inside I was shattered. And my dad, Robert, he didn't know how to be around me anymore. It was like he was always trying to find the right moment, the right words to check in on me without pushing too hard. I'd catch him staring, this worried look on his face, like he was afraid I'd lose at any second. I mean, how could he know what was going on inside my head? Hell, I didn't even know. I tried to go about my days like nothing had happened. Get up, shower, head to work, do my job like I wasn't on the brink of exploding every single minute. But there was this constant gnawing feeling inside me. At the office, it was all business as usual. The deadlines, the endless meetings, the calls that never seemed to end. None of it mattered anymore. I just wanted to scream at everyone, at the whole world, that I'd been betrayed, that my wife and my best friend had ripped my life apart, but I kept it together. Barely. Sophie acted like nothing was wrong. She'd still greet me at the door with a smile, still kiss me goodnight. And that smile, that goddamn smile, I wanted to wipe it off her face every time I saw it. But I couldn't let on that I knew. Not yet. It was like living in a twisted reality where she played the loving wife and I played the fool. And Tom? He was still around, still laughing with her, still acting like nothing was out of the ordinary. It made me sick just being in the same room with them. My dad was a wreck too. He was pacing around the house all the time, muttering under his breath. Every now and then, he'd try to pull me aside, ask me if I was okay, try to talk about what comes next. But I wasn't ready for that conversation. I needed time to process it all. I needed to think. And honestly, I didn't want him to see me break down. One night, though, everything finally came to a head. I came home late from work. I'd stayed in the office longer just to avoid being in the same space as Sophie, and I found my dad in the living room, sitting on the edge of the couch with a beer in his hand. I could tell right away that something was off. He looked defeated, like he'd been carrying this massive weight around all day and couldn't hold it up anymore. "Mark, we need to talk," he said, and my stomach dropped. I knew what was coming, but hearing it out loud made it all too real. I could see his hands shaking as he put down his beer and gestured for me to sit. I remember trying to make some lame excuse like, "It's late, can it wait till tomorrow?" But he shook his head, eyes wide, pleading. "No, son, this can't wait." I sat down, feeling like the walls were closing in on me, like I was trapped in some nightmare I couldn't wake up from. And then he told me. He told me everything. How he'd been watching Sophie, how he'd set up the camera, and what he'd seen on that footage. His voice was steady, but you could hear the pain in it. The desperation of a father trying to protect his son from the worst truth imaginable. I remember every word feeling like a punch to the gut, like each sentence was stripping away the life I thought I knew. I wanted to yell, to throw him out of the house, to tell him he was lying. But then he showed me the footage. I didn't want to see it. God knows I didn't want to see it, but it was like I had to, like I couldn't move on until I saw it with my own eyes. He opened his laptop, and there it was. Just a few clicks, and suddenly the screen was filled with the image of Sophie and Tom, tangled together on the couch. The same couch I'd sat on 1,000 times before. My couch. Our couch. I remember staring at that screen, my hands gripping the edge of the table, so tight my knuckles turned white. It didn't feel real. How could it be real? This was my wife, my best friend, and they were... I couldn't even finish the thought. I couldn't breathe. My whole body felt like it was on fire, like rage was boiling up from somewhere deep inside me. I wanted to rip them both apart, to make them feel every ounce of pain they'd caused me. But I couldn't let them see that. I couldn't let them know that I knew. Not yet. So I told my dad to close the laptop, to get rid of the footage, to forget he ever saw it. He looked at me like I'd gone insane. "Mark, what are you talking about? You can't just pretend this didn't happen." "I'm not pretending," I snapped, my voice barely under control. "I'm going to make them pay, but I'm going to do it my way. And when I do, they won't see it coming." That night, I lay in bed next to Sophie, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with a million thoughts. She slept soundly, curled up on her side, looking so peaceful. It made me want to puke. All I could think about was the lies, the betrayal, the way she'd laughed with Tom like nothing was wrong, like I was some idiot who didn't notice a thing. I knew I had to play this smart. I couldn't let my emotions get the better of me. If I confronted them right then and there, it would just give them an out, let them play the victim. No, I needed to be patient, to find the right moment to strike. I wanted them to feel the same pain, the same humiliation that they'd put me through. I wanted to burn their lives down, the way they'd burn mine. The next few days were hell. I had to act normal around them, smile when I wanted to scream, laugh when I wanted to cry. Every time Tom walked through the door, every time Sophie texted him right in front of me, I had to bite my tongue so hard I tasted blood. But it was worth it, because I knew that the longer I kept my cool, the more they would let their guard down. And when they did, that's when I'd strike. Every night, I would lie awake, going over every detail in my mind. How long had it been going on? Where else had they done it? How many times? Each question felt like a knife to the gut. But I needed to know. I needed to understand just how deep their betrayal went. And then it hit me. I didn't just want to catch them in the act. I wanted to destroy them, to make them feel every ounce of pain they'd caused me. But I had to be smart about it. I had to plan every move, every word, every step of the way. And when the time was right, they would see just how much damage a man with nothing left to lose could do. The days that followed were some of the hardest I've ever lived through. I had to swallow every ounce of pain, every shard of anger, and keep it buried deep inside. I went to work, sat through meetings, and pretended to care about the next quarter's projections, all the while knowing my life had been ripped to pieces behind my back. And then, every night, I'd come home to Sophie, the woman who looked at me like nothing had changed, like our life was still as perfect as she wanted me to believe. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. If I blew up in the moment, all I'd have would be her lies, excuses, and tears. And I didn't want excuses. I wanted consequences. So I kept it all inside, letting my anger simmer, letting my hatred grow. Every fake smile Sophie gave me, every time Tom texted her when he knew I was in the room, I let it burn into my memory. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I started to pay attention to the little things, the dates, the times, the excuses that didn't add up. I'd sneak looks at her phone, scroll through messages, piece together their interactions. Every time she claimed to be out with friends, I'd call those friends, ask casual questions like, "Hey, did Sophie mention what you all got up to last night?" And more often than not, the stories wouldn't match up. It didn't take long before I had a whole mental calendar of lies. Nights when Sophie was running errands, working late, or just needed some me time. It was all bullshit. One Saturday, I managed to grab her phone while she was in the shower, and that's when I hit the jackpot. There it was, text from Tom, hidden under a fake name in her contacts. Tina. It was almost laughable. He was smart enough to hide under a woman's name, but not smart enough to cover his tracks completely. Miss you today, one of the texts read. Last night was amazing. And the worst one, can't wait to see you again when Mark's out of the house. I felt sick reading them, but at the same time, it was the confirmation I needed. It wasn't a one-time thing, a single moment of weakness. This was an ongoing affair right under my nose, and they thought they could get away with it. I told my dad everything. We sat outside one evening, a couple of beers in hand, and I laid it all out, the texts, the lies, every detail I'd pieced together. His face went red with anger, his fists clenching so tight I thought he'd crush the beer can. We can't let them get away with this, he said. They need to be exposed for who they are. I nodded. We talked about different options, how to confront them, how to make sure there was no escape from what they'd done. And that's when Dad came up with the idea of the public confrontation. They've humiliated you, Mark. It's only fair they feel that same humiliation, he said. The plan was simple but brutal. We'd gather all our closest friends, have a nice little party, and then drop the bomb. A projector, a few damning clips from the footage Dad had recorded. It would be like a slow-motion car crash, and they'd have nowhere to run. I'll be honest, part of me hesitated. This was Sophie, the woman I thought I'd spend my life with. And Tom, my best friend since childhood. But every time I felt a shred of doubt, every time I thought about just confronting them quietly and ending it all, I remembered the texts. I remembered the way they laughed together, the way they lied to my face every single day. And then I knew. I wanted them to pay. I wanted them to feel every ounce of shame, every bit of pain that they'd put me through. The next few weeks were a waiting game. I had to be careful, had to act like nothing was different. And let me tell you, it was torture. I had to sit through dinners with Sophie, listening to her talk about her day, pretend to care about the dumb drama going on with her friends. I had to act like I didn't notice the way she'd sneak away to text Tina, or the way she'd brush off my attempts to get closer to her. And Tom? He'd show up every couple of days, same as always, grinning like a damn fool, probably thinking he was pulling one over on me. But I was playing my own game now. I was laying traps, gathering every scrap of evidence I could find. I'd go out of my way to leave the house, make excuses to be busy so they'd think they had the freedom to do whatever they wanted. And sure enough, every time I'd leave, Tom would find his way over. The text, the sneaking around, it all just confirmed what I already knew. And then, finally, the day of the party arrived. I remember waking up that morning with this weird sense of calm. I'd been dreading this day, but now that it was here, all I felt was ready. Ready to burn it all down. Ready to finally show Sophie and Tom what they'd done. To make them face the reality they thought they could escape. I spent the day pretending everything was fine, smiling, laughing, going through the motions. Sophie was excited about the party. She loved hosting, and she went all out, making sure everything was perfect. Tom, of course, showed up early to help set up, and I had to swallow down the bile that rose in my throat every time I saw them together. But I kept my cool, because I knew that by the end of the night, their perfect little fantasy would be over. Friends started arriving around 7 p.m. There were drinks, music, laughter, the kind of carefree atmosphere where nobody would suspect a thing. Sophie was in her element, mingling, playing the role of the perfect hostess. And Tom? He was right there beside her, all smiles and jokes, probably thinking this was just another night where they could have their cake and eat it too. But as the night went on, I could feel the tension building inside me. Every laugh felt like an insult, every smile like a dagger in my back. And finally, after a couple of hours, it was time. I could see my dad standing off to the side, giving me this nod like, let's do this. I grabbed my glass, tapped it with a spoon to get everyone's attention. Hey, everyone, I said, my voice loud enough to carry over the music. I just wanted to thank you all for coming tonight. Sophie and I have been looking forward to this for a while, and there's actually something I'd like to share with you all. Sophie looked at me, her eyes wide, a little smile on her lips. She had no idea what was coming. Tom didn't either, and that was the best part. I walked over to the projector we'd set up earlier, my heart pounding in my chest, and hit play. For a second, There was just confusion. The screen flickered to life, and the footage started playing. It was Sophie and Tom sitting on our couch, laughing, touching, kissing, and then more. I could hear the gasps from around the room, the shocked murmurs as people realized what they were watching. And Sophie? She froze, her face draining of color. Tom's expression twisted into this look of pure horror, like he'd just seen a ghost. "What the hell is this?" Sophie shrieked, running towards me, trying to grab the remote. But it was too late. Everyone could see it. Everyone knew. And all I could do was stand there, staring them down, feeling this cold satisfaction wash over me. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is what you've both been hiding. And now, everyone knows." It was chaos after that. Sophie was screaming, crying, trying to plead her case, but there was no way to spin this. Tom tried to leave, but a couple of the guys blocked his way, demanding answers. And me? I just stood there, watching it all unravel. Because finally, after all the lies, all the deceit, the truth was out. The night of the party was surreal. I'd gone through every possible outcome in my head, rehearsed what I would say 1,000 times, but when the night finally arrived, I felt like I was moving through a fog. I kept myself busy pretending to be the perfect host, making small talk, pouring drinks, cracking jokes like nothing was wrong. And Sophie, she was glowing. I guess that's what happens when you think you're invincible, when you think you've outsmarted everyone around you. Tom showed up, of course. He always did. And just like always, he acted like everything was normal, grinning that stupid grin like he wasn't screwing my wife behind my back. I watched him hug Sophie from across the room, his hand lingering on her lower back a little too long, and it took every bit of strength I had not to put him through a wall right then and there. But I had to keep my cool. I had to let them think they were safe, right until the moment I ripped their world apart. The hours dragged on as friends arrived, filling our house with laughter and noise. Everyone was having a good time, which just made what I was about to do even sweeter. Sophie flitted around, chatting with guests, looking so damn happy. Tom stayed close, always within arm's reach. I played my part, pretending like I didn't notice how often they exchanged glances, how their hands would brush against each other as they moved around the room. And I could feel my dad's eyes on me the whole time, this silent support, like he was reminding me to stay focused. Finally, it was time. I cleared my throat and tapped my glass with a spoon, getting everyone's attention. Sophie turned to me, her face lighting up like it always did when I spoke. Tom looked up, clueless as ever, just another dumb smile on his face. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was coming. "I just want to say thanks to everyone for coming tonight," I began, forcing a smile. "Sophie and I are so grateful to have such wonderful friends. And there's actually something I'd like to share with all of you tonight, something I think you'll all find very eye-opening." I could feel the tension in the room shift, the curiosity on everyone's faces. Sophie looked at me, tilting her head. "Mark, what are you talking about?" she asked, laughing nervously. Tom's face went blank, and I could see that flicker of fear cross his eyes. He knew. Somewhere deep down, he knew this was it. I didn't say another word. I just walked over to the projector, turned off the lights, and hit play. And there it was, projected on the living room wall for all to see. The footage of Sophie and Tom together. At first, there was silence. Just the muffled sounds of their laughter, their whispers, their bodies moving against each other. And then, chaos. "What the hell is this?" Sophie screamed, rushing toward me, her face a mask of panic and anger. But I didn't back down. I let the footage keep playing, let the truth spill out in front of everyone we knew. There were gasps, murmurs, cries of disbelief. A couple of our friends looked away, unable to watch, but most of them just stood there, eyes glued to the screen, witnessing the destruction of a marriage in real time. Tom tried to speak, but his voice cracked, and he choked on the words. "Mark, man, it's not what it looks like." He reached out to me, but I smacked his hand away. "Don't you dare," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Don't you fucking dare try to defend this." The whole room was buzzing with emotion. Shock, disgust, pity, and Sophie was in full meltdown mode. "Mark, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. This isn't fair." You have to let me explain. Explain? I cut her off, my voice rising above the chaos. What's there to explain, Sophie? You lied. You cheated. You broke everything we had. And now everyone can see you for who you really are. I turned to Tom, who looked like a deer in headlights, pale and shaking. And you, I said, the hatred boiling in my voice. I trusted you. I let you into my home, into my life, and this is how you repay me? You're dead to me, Tom. Both of you are. The room fell silent. The only sound Sophie's sobs and Tom's heavy breathing. And in that silence, I made my final declaration. I'm filing for divorce, I said, looking Sophie dead in the eyes. And as for you, Tom, our friendship is over. I never want to see either of you again. I walked out after that, leaving them standing there in the wreckage of their lies. I didn't wait for the fallout, didn't care about the whispers or the accusations that were sure to follow. All I knew was that, for the first time in weeks, I could finally breathe. The days that followed were rough. Sophie tried everything, begging, crying, screaming, to get me to forgive her, to work things out. She said it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything, that we could fix this. But there was nothing left to fix. I'd seen too much, heard too much, and the thought of being with her after everything, it was like trying to swallow glass. The divorce process was brutal. There were endless arguments about the division of assets, back and forths with lawyers, and more than a few nights where I thought I might lose it. Sophie kept trying to justify herself, to paint me as the bad guy for exposing her, for not giving her a second chance. But the truth was, I didn't want a second chance. I just wanted out. Tom reached out once, called me late one night, drunk and slurring his words, apologizing over and over again. I hung up on him, blocked his number, and deleted every photo, every message, every memory I had of him. As far as I was concerned, he didn't exist anymore. For a while, I moved in with my dad. It was weird being back in my childhood home like I'd gone full circle. But it was comforting, too, being with someone who understood, who supported me without judgment. I started seeing a therapist, talking through the anger, the hurt, the guilt. And slowly, day by day, I began to rebuild. I reconnected with old friends, people I'd lost touch with because of my marriage, because of how much I'd sacrificed for a life that was all a lie. I picked up new hobbies, went hiking, started playing guitar again, things that I'd forgotten I loved. I was trying to find myself again, trying to remember who I was before Sophie, before the lies. And one morning, I found myself standing on a balcony at dawn, the cool air on my face, watching the sunrise over the horizon. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope, like maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. It was a new beginning, and I was ready for whatever came next. I didn't know where life would take me, didn't know what the future held. But standing there, watching the sky light up with the colors of a new day, I felt a peace I hadn't felt in years. And I knew, deep down, that I was going to be okay. Because sometimes, the best revenge is simply moving on.